Hey there, everyone, and welcome to Pour and Explore, a wine, food, and travel podcast. I'm your host, Nick Elliott, the wine guy. I'd love to be your go-to guide for all things wine, food, and the amazing places they take us. Here on Pour and Explore, we'll sip, savor, and wander through the exciting world of wine, discuss incredible cuisines, and uncover the stories behind unforgettable destinations. Each week, I'll bring you lively conversations with wine experts, chefs, travel pros, and fellow enthusiasts. We'll share practical tips, hilarious tales, and plenty of inspiration to fuel your next adventure. So grab a glass, pull up a chair, and join me as we pour, explore, and celebrate the good life. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Pour and Explore. This is the podcast where we sip, savor, and stroll our way through the world of wine, food, and travel. I'm Nick Elliott, the wine guy, chef, sommelier, winemaker, who has been elbows deep in grapes 4 times that I can count. You know, whether you are a casual sipper or a hardcore dork, if you will, you are certainly in the right place. Today's episode, because we're approaching harvest time here in the Northern Hemisphere. Some places we're already into it. Some other places will start a little bit later, depending on what they're making, things like that. But we are right now in harvest season. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about what that means. It is the busiest, craziest, most magical time in wine country. And, back in April, I did an episode about winemaking and how the wine goes from the vineyard into the bottle. So definitely check that one out. But I wanted to focus a little bit more on the actual picking of the grapes and growing of the grapes and so on, because I think it deserves a little bit more attention, because I would love for all of my listeners to have a deeper appreciation of what goes into your bottle. And the only way you can do that, in my opinion, is to hear about it from someone who's done it. So want to buckle up, because we are going behind the cellar door today to explore what really happens during the crush, and then into picking, to the pressing, to the fermentation, and to the celebrating. We are crushing it today. So I am so happy you're here. So let's go. Let's start before a single grape has been picked. Winemakers and vineyard managers have been watching their vines like hawks for months at this point. And as summer turns to fall, this is when things turn real. It's a dance of science and instinct. We're checking sugar levels, we're checking acidity, we're checking pH levels, seed ripeness, the amount of tannin in the skin. We're tasting berries straight off the vine, and we're making decisions that are going to shape the wine for years to come, the wine that winds up in your glass. And it might seem like magic, but we are really out there every day, sometimes before the sun even comes up, making sure that every single berry that goes into your wine glass is a good one. And that is where it all begins. We've planted the grapes, obviously, at this point, and they're growing, and the vines are maturing, and we've got a beautiful canopy on the grapes at this point, beautiful green leaves that are growing and soaking up the sun and producing these beautiful grape clusters on the vine. The main step that we're looking for during this process is a process called veraison. You may or may not have heard this term, veraison. This is the point when grapes start changing color and softening. And as soon as we see veraison start to happen in the vineyard, we know that the countdown to harvest is on. So this is the start, if you will, of the harvest season. And while this is going on, again, we're checking every day, making sure that all of our levels are correct. But behind the scenes, in the places that you can't see, the dark tunnels and buildings where wine is actually made, in the cellar, the tanks are being cleaned and the presses are being scrubbed and the forklifts are being tuned up. The bins and the buckets are being stacked to the ceiling. I remember back when that I was working in the winery, this was a time that you didn't get a whole lot of break. You did not get a whole lot of time to sleep. You were up before the dawn and you were working way into the evening hours, making sure that everything was perfect to be ready when that flag flew and it was time to roll out with all of that equipment and people. Of course, we can't forget the people. And that is what we were prepping for, getting ready for that moment. So you didn't get a whole lot of sleep. There was lots of caffeine, lots of hydration, and of course, lots of hope that the weather was going to cooperate. And weather obviously plays a big factor into farming in general, but I would say it's especially important when you're talking about wine grapes. And let me tell you, every winemaker becomes a part time meteorologist, I would say all year, but especially during this time. You get too much heat, your grapes are going to over ripen, and that's not a good thing. Too much rain, and you might get mold on the grapes, or your grapes will have so much water in them because they're drinking all of that rainwater that you get a diluted juice. And depending on where you are, we don't have a huge problem with it here in California, again, knocking on wood, but frost can certainly be a thing. And don't even get me started about frost. You can only imagine. So, we've done all of the prep. The vineyard is about to give birth to these amazing clusters of grapes, and that means that it's picking time. The vineyard is ready for us to go in there and do our thing. Depending on the region, as I mentioned earlier, harvest kicks off as early as August in some places. Sparkling wine, where sparkling wine is made, folks who are making sparkling wine, this is the time that we're picking our high acid, low pH grapes. And we are picking in this time for those reasons. And then this harvest season can stretch all the way into maybe October or even November. Check out my episode about dessert wines. I talk a lot about late harvest wines, ice vines, and things like that. And you're going to have great dessert wines that are being picked during those later harvest months, October and November. A few different ways to actually pick the crop in a vineyard. Of course, hand picking is my preferred method, but of course, if you have tens of thousands of acres of grapes, it might not be in the cards to hand pick your grapes. Hand picking is a more gentle process. It is a more selective process. And you'll find that most premium wines are made from hand picked grapes. And then, of course, there's mechanical or machine picked. This is faster, it's more efficient, great for large scale production, as I talked about, and it means less people, maybe, depending on how many acres you have. And each one of these methods has its place in the winemaking world. But once we've decided when we are going to pick the grapes and how we are going to pick the grapes, we have to decide, what that vibe is going to look like, if you will, what the schedule is going to look like. Harvest days start early, like 4 a.m. early. And why do we do that? We do that because it's cooler. That's going to be number one. Cooler temperatures protect the grapes and they preserve the acidity for when the grapes wind up down in the winery. Now, I was lucky enough to work at a winery where the actual production facility was on the same property as the vineyard itself. So getting from A to B was a very, well, not easy task, but it was easier than, let's say, you've got a winery in another city where you literally have to load tractor trailers with all of your grapes, take them to the production facility, unload that tractor trailer, and start the process from there. So there are a lot of different ways that this can be done. And again, why cooler temperatures? Why are we starting so early in the morning? It's also to help the farmhands, the folks who are picking those grapes. We don't want them out in scorching heat at noontime in September or August, where it's 90, 100 degrees out. We want to make sure that we're taking care of not only our grapes, but our people as well. So you've got crews in the vineyards with headlamps or the big lights, the floodlights, and they are snipping clusters of grapes by hand. The trucks are hauling the bins, and it is absolutely a symphony of chaos and adrenaline, to keep you going, of course. Is it romantic? Kind of. Is it brutal? Absolutely. I've got the scars and the bad knees and the bad back to prove it. And is it worth it? Every single time, people. So now that those grapes are picked, it is time for what we lovingly call the crush. It is time to make sure that, the best possible juice is being extracted from those grapes. So the first stop is going to be the sorting, and the sorting process is going to be where we are separating leaves and twigs and underripe berries and, yes, bugs from the grape clusters. And sometimes this is done by the human eye, but some wineries, larger production wineries, will use optical sorters where, they're actually using machinery to pick out all of those things. But most of the time, we're relying on good old-fashioned human eyes and hands to make this happen. Again, very, very laborious, folks. Then we go into the actual crush, and this also includes what we call destemming. Red grapes usually get crushed and destemmed. What does that mean? We're actually pulling the berry off of the grape cluster, and we are separating the stems and gently cracking the skins of the grapes. White grapes, they will often go directly into the press, and we'll avoid as much skin contact as possible. But by adding the stems into the crush for white wines, that's going to give us a little more astringency, a little more acidity, a little more earthiness in that wine production. And those are the basics right there, very, very high level. Again, I can nerd out about it for, for a long time, but I'm not going to do that here on this episode, maybe another one. So now we have grape juice. We have grape juice all by itself in the terms of white wine, or we might have grape juice mixed with the skins and pulps and seeds in the case of red wines. And this is where the fermentation begins. Again, I want you to go back a few episodes and listen to, I did an entire episode on fermentation. It's only about 20-25 minutes long, but it really gives you a different perspective on not only what fermentation is, but how it works, and appreciation for the work that goes into producing wine. So I would love for you to listen to that one if you haven't already. In the fermentation process, we are either adding yeast to the fermentation into the grape juice, or we are allowing the wild yeast that lives on the grapes to go to work. And what we're doing in this process of fermentation is we are turning sugar into alcohol. And then CO2, or carbon dioxide, is another byproduct of the fermentation process. During this time, we're going to see tanks bubbling over and fermenters foaming. Temperatures, not only in the individual tanks, is rising, but the temperature in the winery is also rising at this point as well, because this process of fermentation is very hot, it's very violent, and there's a lot of stuff happening during this time. It is alive, it is wild, and I will tell you from firsthand experience, it smells like heaven and sweat and fresh grape juice all at once. And it is so much fun. It is one of the most interesting things I've ever done in my life. And I loved every minute of it. There's another step in the process called punch down or pump over, and that is where we are mixing the fermenting grape juice. We're mixing that, and some ways of going about that is taking the juice from the bottom and hooking it up to a hose and pumping it back to the top. That's one way of going about it. Or again, in more small production wineries, we are literally standing over top of the tank and we're using a punch down. I even forget what they're called at this point, to actually push the grapes around to make sure that, especially in red wine, that we're getting the most color and expression out of all of the grapes that are in there. The cap, if you will, think about all of the grape skins rising to the top. What we want to do is we want to make sure that we're pushing those to the bottom. Again, just gently mixing the grape juice and the grape skins and so on. You know, 2x4s and just getting over those grape fats and mixing it all together. It's a lot of fun. And at the end of the day, you're covered from your legs up in grape juice. I've had purple hands more times than I can count. And again, it really, really is a satisfying way to do things. So now that we've gone through the fermentation process, we're in the winemaking process. Now we get into the post-harvest experience in the winery. Our fermentations are slowing down. We're moving our wine to barrels, tanks, or steel drums for aging. Some wines, in the case of white wines, will be ready in just a few months. In the case of a lot of red wines, it might be years before that wine sees the light of day. And again, go back to my episode about the, going from vineyard to glass. I'll talk a little bit more about what happens during all of the time after the wine is made. But for now, I really just wanted to, again, familiarize you more with harvest time. And it really is a lot of fun. There's a lot of mess that's left behind after the production of wine, sticky floors, there's grape skin everywhere. Your fermenters, again, need scrubbing and cleaning. Your entire team is running on fumes and burritos. Shout out to Lucy, my dear Lucy. I've had more burritos from Lucy's taco shop than I can even count. Love you, Lucy. Anyway, this is also when we get to take a breath. This is when we get to sit down and really look around and enjoy the end of this crazy time of year. And usually that involves, popping open a bottle of wine. Crazy, right? Or maybe a beer, just depending on what you like. You toast the crew, you sleep for a couple of days, and you get up to start the process all over again. It is super, super magical. On this note, I'm hoping that I can get this episode out in time that, if you're lucky enough, and most of us are in this country, we're lucky enough to live near wine country. I would absolutely encourage you to find a winery that is in its harvest time right now. Give them a call and see if you can visit. Number one, can you volunteer, to help pick grapes? If you really want to get to know this process firsthand, can you book yourself a tour in the winery while all of this is going on? This is really the craziest time in the winery, but it's also the most interesting time in a winery and at a vineyard to go and see it and see where the work is actually being done. For visitors during this time, the energy is absolutely electric. You can smell the fermentation in the air. It has this very, very specific aroma to it, wine fermenting. Wineries often host harvest events, crush parties, and grape stomps and barrel tastings. Now is the time to get those things on the calendar. Again, if you're lucky enough to live around wine country or you're going to wine country during these times, make sure you're asking about these things because it takes the experience of tasting wine to a whole new level. And I highly, highly encourage it. And hey, you even might get to meet the winemaker, in their rubber boots and their stained hands and, with their shovel over their shoulder. Who knows? Not making any guarantees, but maybe you will. Some tips from someone who's done it and used to book tours to the winery and take people barrel tasting and things like that. You always want to book ahead. Never just show up to a winery expecting to have that experience that I was just talking about. When you do get the opportunity, be patient. This is a working place. You're walking into a factory here, folks. This factory is making wine. So be patient, be alert, make sure that you are being careful, of course, during this time, listening to the instructions of the folks who are working in the winery. Ask questions. Absolutely ask questions. In case you didn't know it, people who make stuff love talking about the stuff that they make. So if you get the opportunity to meet the winemaker or one of the winemaking staff, ask questions. How do you do this? Why do you do that? They're going to want to tell you, and it's very, very cool. And try something new. Fresh grape juice right out of the wine press is delicious. It's extremely sweet, but it's absolutely delicious. Fermenting wine tastes like nothing else. And of course, if you get the opportunity to do a barrel tasting, in other words, literally tasting wine directly out of the barrel, I would definitely highly, highly recommend that. It really is the most real way to connect with the winemaking process. And I'm assuming since you've stuck around for all of this time, 25 minutes at this point, that that's something that you're interested in, being able to connect to that process. So I appreciate you listening and I appreciate you being here with me today on Pour and Explore. So there you have it. Harvest season in all its glory. It's absolutely chaotic. It's exhausting. It's sticky. It's loud. It's beautiful. And it is unforgettable. And if you've never visited a winery during this time, you are missing the heartbeat of wine country. So go. That's all I have to say. So go. Make a weekend out of it. Sip something that's still fermenting. Talk to a tired winemaker and just get out there and crush it, people. Just get out there and crush it. And always, if you want to sip smarter, travel deeper, and pair your wine with wonder, please hit that subscribe button. If this is your first episode, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you'll listen to more. Hit that subscribe button. Follow me. Feel free to leave me a review. Let me know what you think. Hit me up on social media. I would love to hear what you have to say about your experience with Pour and Explore. And if you love to taste wine and it's something that you would like to do, I host personal wine tastings down here in the San Diego area. I do them in person, but maybe you're having a party. We've got Thanksgiving coming up, Christmas time as well. Hit me up and I would love to do a virtual wine tasting and education seminar for you and your friends and family. Just head over to thewineguy.vin and you can learn a little bit more about that. So with that, folks, I'm going to leave it and say what I always say as I'm wrapping the show up. And my sincerest hope for you is that you keep wondering and wandering. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Pour and Explore. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your stories, and your questions, so you can drop me a line at cheers@thewineguy.vin. That's cheers@thewineguy.vin. Or let's connect on TikTok, Instagram, or Facebook. Grab those links on my website at thewineguy.vin. Until next time, let's keep wondering and wandering. Cheers, everyone.